phones, Babylons can't crack the.
What it do, YouTube? B Kelly back again with another banger. Today's video, I'm making my Conference USA college football predictions for the 2020-21 season. And first, I'm going to talk about the Conference USA West Division. With my first place spot, I have UAB. Now, UAB's been a team that's been on the rise lately, and I'm expecting big things from them this season. I have them going 11-1. I have them beating New Mexico State, then beating Alabama A&M, but then losing at Miami at Hard Rock Stadium, but then winning out beating South Alabama, UTSA, Rice, Western Kentucky, Louisiana Tech, Old Dominion, North Texas, UTEP, and Southern Miss. Now, I see that as a best case scenario. I don't see them finishing undefeated. I don't see them beating Miami, especially early on and in Miami. Now, worst case scenario for UAB, I would probably have to say is a 9-3 season. I can see them losing to Louisiana Tech and Southern Miss. With my second place spot, I have Southern Mississippi. Now, Southern Mississippi's football team has been pretty consistent, and they've been going to bowl games quite a bit lately. Now, I'm predicting a 9-3 record. I have them beating South Alabama, Louisiana Tech, Jackson State in their first 3 games, but then losing to Auburn in Auburn, Alabama. And then I have them beating North Texas and Denton, and then I have them losing at home against FAU. Then I have them going on a winning streak beating UTEP, Liberty, Rice, Western Kentucky, and UTSA. But in the final game of the season, I have them losing to UAB. The best case scenario I see for Southern Miss is an 11-1 season, if they can beat Louisiana Tech and UAB. Now, worst case scenario for them would honestly have to be probably a 7-5 season if they cannot beat Louisiana Tech or maybe even Western Kentucky, because Western Kentucky's not a team that's terrible either. With my third place spot, I have Louisiana Tech. Now, Louisiana Tech has been pretty good and consistent these last few years, and they finished 10-3 last year and even beat Miami in a bowl game to finish 10-3. Now, I'm predicting a 9-3 record from them this season. Even though they have a lot of good pieces, they also lost some pretty valuable defensive pieces to the NFL draft and even lost their starting quarterback that's been a starting quarterback there for a while. Now, I'm predicting a 9-3 record. I have them beating UNLV in their first game in Las Vegas, then losing to Southern Mississippi in Mississippi. Then I have them beating Prairie View A&M, then losing to Baylor in Waco. Then I have them going on a winning streak, beating UTEP, Marshall, and UTSA. But then I have them losing to UAB on Halloween night. But then I have them winning out, beating North Texas, Rice, even SEC Vanderbilt, and winning their final game of the season at FIU. Now, best case scenario I see for them is a 10-2 season. I say that because I don't think they can beat UAB and Southern Miss to be 11-1 on the season, so I'm going to say 10-2. Worst case scenario for them, though, I would have to say 7-5, because they could lose to Vanderbilt, even though Vanderbilt is garbage. They're still an SEC team. They're still a Power 5 team. They can still find a way to win, even though it'll be later in the season, so more than likely Vanderbilt's going to have, no fans there. But they could lose to FIU. FIU is definitely still a really good team, and even though they lost their starting quarterback and a couple other pieces, they're still a pretty good football team down in Florida. With my fourth place spot, I have North Texas. Now, North Texas, I'm saying they're going to be 4-8 this year, but that could be a little nice because they probably lost their best quarterback in school history in Mason Fine, and one of their best receivers ever, Enrico Bussey. He transferred to Hawaii. So they got a lot of question marks going into the season. I have them beating Houston Baptist in their first game, but then I have them going on a losing streak, losing to Texas A&M, SMU, Houston, Southern Miss, and Charlotte, and even Middle Tennessee. And then I have them beating UTEP, but that's an easy win. It's UTEP. No one expects them to lose that game, except maybe UTEP fans if they exist. And then I have them losing to Louisiana Tech and UAB, but then I have them finishing strong, beating Rice and UTSA in the final 2 games of the season to be 4-8. But let's talk about the best case scenario. Best case scenario in my eyes is a 6-6 season if they can beat Charlotte and Middle Tennessee. Worst case scenario is a 2-10 season because they could lose to Rice and UTSA, especially with the people they are losing. With my 5th place spot, I have UTSA. Now I'm predicting a 3-9 record for the Roadrunners. Now, their out-of-conference schedule, it's not the easiest. I have them losing to LSU in Baton Rouge. I have them then losing to Texas State, but then beating Grambling State at home. Then I have them losing to Memphis, and then UAB, then losing to Old Dominion, then losing to Louisiana Tech and FAU. But then they get kind of hot. I have them beating Rice in Houston and beating UTEP in the Alamo Dome. But then I have them losing their last 2 games of the season at Southern Miss and versus North Texas. Now, let's talk about the best case scenario. Best case scenario in my eyes is a 6-6 season if they can beat Old Dominion, Texas State, and North Texas. They could beat those 3 teams. But let's talk about the worst case scenario for them. Worst case scenario in my eyes would have to be a 2-10 season. I could see Grambling State pulling off an upset and beating them. Grambling State isn't always a bad team, especially with their competition. I can see Grambling State actually beating them. Will they? Probably not, but they definitely could. With my 6th place spot in the West Division of the Conference USA, I have Rice. Now I'm predicting a 2-10 record for Rice. And their out-of-conference schedule, it's not easy, especially for a team that hasn't been very good. Now I have them losing at Houston, losing to Army at home, and then losing to LSU, and then I have them winning against Lamar, to be a total of 1-4 now, heading into conference play. And then I have them going on a losing streak, losing to Marshall, UAB, Middle Tennessee, Southern Miss, UTSA, Louisiana Tech, North Texas, and then finally UTEP. They finally get a win at home to be 2-10. Now let's talk about the best case scenario for Rice. Best case scenario in my eyes would be a 4-8 season if they could beat North Texas and UTSA to be 4-8. But worst case scenario would have to be a 1-11 season or an 0-12 season. I don't think they're going to go winless. I think they're going to beat UTEP no matter what. UTEP's one of the worst teams in college football, but they could go 1-11 if they lost to Lamar or UTEP. With my last place spot in the West Division, I have UTEP, and this shouldn't come as a surprise. For UTEP, I'm predicting an 0-12 record. I have them losing all their games. I have them losing to Texas Tech, Nevada, Texas, New Mexico State, Louisiana Tech, Southern Miss, Charlotte, North Texas, FIU, UTSA, UAB, and Rice. Now, best case scenario in my eyes for them would have to be a 3-9 season if they could beat New Mexico State, UTSA, or Rice. But I really do not see that happening at all. They might get 1 win if they can beat New Mexico State, but I don't see that happening. And you guys already know the worst case scenario, it's 0-12. Now on to the Conference USA East Division. With my first place spot in the East Division, I have FAU. Now FAU, even though they lost Lane Kiffin to Ole Miss, I feel like FAU still going to be a very good football team, especially under quarterback Chris Robinson, who I think is going to make even more strides in year 3 as a starter. Now, I'm predicting an 11-1 record. I have them losing their first game at Minnesota, and then I have them winning out, beating Stony Brook, Georgia Southern, USF, Charlotte, Southern Miss, Marshall, UTSA, Western Kentucky, FIU, Old Dominion, and Middle Tennessee. Now, I see that as the best case scenario as well. Now, let's talk about the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, in my eyes, would probably have to be a 9-3 season, losing to Southern Miss or USF, maybe even 8-4, losing to Southern Miss, USF, and FIU. I don't see them being worse than 8-4, but I would say anywhere from the 9-3 range to 11-1 is pretty reasonable. With my second place spot, I have FIU. I'm predicting a 9-3 record for FIU. I have them beating Jacksonville State, then losing to UCF, then I have them beating Old Dominion, Liberty, Middle Tennessee, Charlotte, UMass, Marshall, UTEP, then losing to FAU, then beating Western Kentucky in Kentucky, then losing their final game of the season versus Louisiana Tech. Now, best case scenario in my eyes for them, honestly, it would probably have to be a 9-3 season. I don't see them being a 10-win team at all. 9-3 seems pretty likely. Now, they could beat a couple of teams I say they're going to lose to, but I don't see them being anything better than 9-3. Worst case scenario, though, this is the one we got to talk about. Worst case scenario, in my eyes, would probably have to be a 7-5 season with a loss to Marshall or Western Kentucky. With my third place spot, I have Marshall. Now for Marshall, I'm predicting a 6-6 record. I have them losing to East Carolina and Pitt in their first 2 games. Then I have them beating Ohio. Then I have them losing to Boise State. But then they start getting into a winning streak, beating Rice and Western Kentucky. But then they go on a 3-game losing streak, losing to Louisiana Tech, FAU, and FIU. Then I have them winning out to be bowl eligible to beat Middle Tennessee, Charlotte, and Old Dominion. Now, worst case scenario in my eyes would probably have to be a 5-7 season with a loss to Charlotte. I don't see them doing any worse than 5-7. They're a pretty consistent team. But best case scenario in my eyes would probably have to be a 8-4 season if they can beat East Carolina and FIU. That to be 8-4, that's my best case scenario for Marshall. With my fourth place spot, I have Western Kentucky. Now, I'm predicting a 5-7 record for them this season, which might be a little tough on them because they are a little better than 5-7 if you ask me, but that's what I have them going right now. Now, I have them beating Chattanooga in their first game, then losing to Indiana, then beating Liberty at home, then losing to Louisville, then beating Middle Tennessee, then losing to Marshall, UAB, but then beating Old Dominion, then losing to FAU, Southern Miss, FIU, and then winning their final game at Charlotte to be 5-7. Now, best case scenario in my eyes, I would say would to be a 7-5 record if they can beat Marshall and FIU. Now, worst case scenario, though, on the other hand, would probably have to be a 3-9 record if they could not beat Liberty or Charlotte. With my fifth place spot, I have Charlotte. Now, Charlotte is a team that made it to a bowl game last season, but I wouldn't say they're the best team ever, but they did make their first ever bowl game on the FBS level. But I have them finishing 5-7 this year. I have them losing to Tennessee, beating Norfolk State, losing to Duke, Georgia State, FAU, then beating North Texas and Denton. Then I have them losing to FIU, but then I have them beating UTEP at home. Then I have them beating Middle Tennessee in Tennessee, and I even have them beating Old Dominion at home. But then I have them losing their final 2 games of the season at Marshall and against Western Kentucky to finish 5-7. Now, let's talk about the best case scenario for them this season. Best case scenario in my eyes for them would probably have to be an 8-4 record, even though I don't think they're going to get to 8-4. I could see them beating Marshall, maybe even Western Kentucky in between those 2 games. I feel like they have a higher chance of beating Western Kentucky, though, this season. I could definitely see them beating FIU. FIU, they're a little confusing. FIU's hit or miss. They're either going to be a pretty good team, or they're just going to be mediocre as anyone can get. And Georgia State's confusing. Georgia State did make a bowl game last year with a quarterback with a torn ACL, and they even beat Tennessee, but I could see Charlotte beating them, but it kind of depends on how the game's played out. But for now, I'm sticking with 5-7. Worst case scenario would probably have to be a 4-8 record with a loss to North Texas or Middle Tennessee to be 3-9 or 4-8. You know, it's pretty reversible. I see a lot of close games though. With my 6th place spot, I have Middle Tennessee. Now for Middle Tennessee, I have them finishing 5-7. I have them losing to Duke, beating Indiana State, losing to Virginia Tech, then beating Old Dominion, then losing to Western Kentucky and FIU back-to-back games, then beating North Texas and Rice in back-to-back games. Then I have them losing to Charlotte and Marshall in back-to-back games. Then I have them winning their final game of the season at UConn, then in their final game of the season, losing to FAU in Tennessee. Now, let's talk about the best case scenario that I see. Best case scenario in my eyes would have to be a 7-5 season if they could beat Western Kentucky and Charlotte. But worst case scenario in my eyes would probably have to be a 4-8 record with a loss to North Texas. With my last place spot in the East Division of Conference USA, I have Old Dominion. Now, with Old Dominion, I'm predicting a 3-9 record this season. I have them losing to Wake Forest, beating Hampton, losing to FIU and Middle Tennessee, but then beating UConn at UConn, and then beating UTSA in the Alamo Dome, and then losing to Virginia, Western Kentucky, UAB, Charlotte, FAU, and Marshall. Now, let's talk about the best case scenario for Old Dominion. I mean, to be honest, best case is 4-8 if they could beat Middle Tennessee, but I don't see that happening. Even 3-9 is being really nice to them because they went 1-11 last season. Now, I say worst case scenario in my eyes would be 1-11, and their only win would probably come against Hampton. But I feel comfortable that they would probably go 2-10 if they can't beat UTSA because UConn is horrible and so is Hampton. So 2-10 and 1-11 don't really seem out of the picture, but I'm going to stick with 3-9. If you guys liked the video, remember to smash that like button, turn on them post notifications, and subscribe for more videos. B. Kelly out.